the most openly hostile to Brexit of all the main party leaders. But what's not entirely clear is what a Liberal Democrat immigration policy would look like, and he's with me now. Sir Vince, can I start by asking whether you think Amber Rudd should now resign?
I think we should wait and see what she has to say tomorrow. I mean, clearly she's in considerable difficulty on two scores. I mean, either she's misled Parliament or she was the last person in the country to know that the Home Office was operating a quota system for deportees, and they're both difficult issues for her. But I don't believe in lynch mobs. I want to hear what she has to say.
You're being very measured, of course. Is that because the Liberal Democrats are also partly responsible for this hostile environment on immigration that's caused the trouble in the first place? Because it happened under the coalition when you guys were there sitting alongside them.
Well, actually, we spent a lot of our time in the coalition fighting Theresa May, personally, in my case, and my colleagues. Norman Baker resigned over it. I, tried to roll back a lot of the things. But actually, I think all parties have got some responsibility to this. It goes back to New Labour. I think the working assumption successive governments have made is that the public out there are pretty bigoted, and they've got to be given red meat in the form of these very restricted measures. It's done a lot of harm. And I think the interesting thing about Windrush is that perhaps for the first time, the public opinion has been ahead of the politicians, seeing that there's a terrible injustice here, and it should not be allowed to pass.
And you say that the Lib Dems were pushing back against this policy all the way through. But who was the minister in charge of the crucial cabinet committee at the time? Can you remind us?
Well, it may well have been the Deputy Prime Minister,
Nick
I
Clegg,
suspect.
it surely was.
He fought a very good fight, actually, on this issue.
But he then made a very, very powerful speech about the importance of deporting illegal immigrants and sort of boasting about how their bank accounts were being frozen and taken away and they weren't being allowed to drive and so on. He sounded very gung-ho for the policy at the time.
Well, I don't think that was the spirit that I heard. I mean, there were a whole lot of very powerful measures that Theresa May was pushing at the time. Things like, making landlords responsible for immigration control. We stopped that. We simply had pilot studies. Because once the Lib Dems are out of the coalition, they just introduced the policy in a very aggressive way. But what I think all of this is forgetting about is we're actually dealing with people. I mean, on my surgery on Friday night, a lady came along. Her husband is being deported tomorrow to Sri Lanka. He alleges he's been tortured, may well have been. And I think the central point is that we're not talking about numbers here. We're talking about real people. And I hope that one of the lessons of the last few weeks is this is getting through.
And I raised the question about a Liberal Democrat immigration policy. For quite a long time, your party had a policy of an amnesty for illegal immigrants. Why did that go?
I think because an unqualified amnesty is not the right approach. But I think if people have been living here a very long time and they've settled and they've got family here, we should just exercise good judgment. But I think across-the-board amnesty, regardless of conditions, regardless of whether people have got a criminal record or not, was not the right approach. But I think where people have been settled, and of course there's the whole story about Windrush, they've been settled here for a generation, they're law-abiding citizens, they've paid their taxes. It's absolutely outrageous that their status should be questioned.
So now that I think almost everybody is looking again at immigration policy in the light of this, where would the Liberal Democrats like to be?
I do believe you have to have managed borders, you have to have immigration control, but it should be done in a compassionate and efficient way. I mean, I think one of the problems at the moment is that because the Home Office is hopelessly understaffed, or perhaps not properly managed, but hopelessly understaffed, very large numbers of just terribly inefficient decisions have been made. I mean, also on Friday night, I had a couple who came to see me doing high-tech work. Their visa clearance should have taken 6 months maximum. It's taken 18 months. They're now going to lose their jobs. They'll lose their home. This is happening to tens of thousands of people. It is very, very incompetent, and it needs to be made much more efficient.
I mentioned at the top of the programme that you made quite a striking intervention in your speech to the Liberal Democrat conference in March. I'd just like to remind people of what you said. You were talking about the Brexit vote. You said, "I thought the public have voted to be poorer. That is their right. What's changed my mind is the evidence that Brexit was overwhelmingly the choice of the older generation. Too many were driven by a nostalgia for a world where passports were blue, faces were white, and the map was coloured imperial pink." That sounds as if you're accusing Brexit voters of being racist.
Some probably have that attitude.
So you think the Brexit vote
not all.
was tinged by racism?
The simple point I was making was that the Brexit vote was very heavily influenced by age. You know, younger people overwhelmingly voted to remain, older people overwhelmingly voted to leave. And there were different motives. I mean, you know, some good reasons, some bad reasons. But, I mean, after all that we've experienced in the last few weeks around the immigration debate, I mean, the ugly truth is that race has been a key factor in British politics. I was simply making this quite explicit. Of course, large numbers of older people voted Brexit for what they thought were very good reasons. Nothing to do with that.
Some voted because they were racist.
Some undoubtedly were concerned with looking back to a world where immigration was not an issue in the way it is today.
And the way you phrase that implies that you think because of that, the Brexit referendum result wasn't in some sense legitimate.
Well, it was legitimate. It happened. I mean, I'm not trying to reopen the referendum. It's happened. We're living with the consequences of it. But the view I and my party take is we have no idea at the moment what Brexit's going to look like. I mean, all kinds of things could happen. And at the end of it, when we have a clearer picture later this year about what Brexit involved, we go back to the public and have a public vote on the outcome.
To be absolutely clear, you're not suggesting that lots of Brexit voters didn't vote for Brexit for completely honourable, constitutional and reasonable reasons.
Absolutely.
Okay, and you want this second vote very much. Can I ask you about...
It is the second vote because it's not rerunning the last one.
It is a great semantic debate.
It's an important semantic point.
All right, okay, well, another vote, a vote of the public, whatever we call it. There's a lot of stuff in the papers today suggesting that there is a majority in the Commons as well as the Lords to tie the government's hands, as it were, when they finally bring their deal back to the House of Commons. Is that your understanding?
Well, I think there is a Commons vote coming up very shortly on customs union, which is, I think, quite an important staging point. Large numbers of Conservatives as well as opposition parties realise, I think, leaving the customs union would be particularly disastrous, and they may well vote to change that. There is stuff coming through the House of Lords, which is questioning some of the very damaging, centralising features of the current legislation. So it's absolutely right that Parliament should be questioning and changing the approach to Brexit.
We've got a lot of English local election seats coming up this week. You said this is going to be a watershed moment for the Lib Dems. You got hammered last time round. What would a watershed feel like?
Well, I'm quietly optimistic that we are turning the corner. I mean, we've done well in real elections over the last 6 months or so, much better than the other two
Hundreds
parties.
of new councillors?
No, the way what I would regard as a good night is that we hold the various council we have, and we have quite a lot of Lib Dem councils, very good quality. We want to see them return. I think there's gone a good night. We'll win one or two more.
Take back Richmond, take back Kingston.
They're certainly in play. I'm not making a prediction of them. And I think there are large numbers of other areas. I mean, a place like Sunderland, Hull, for example, where we're facing the Labour Party, where we don't expect to win the councils, we may, but where we hopefully will get a bridgehead in the form of a few councillors that we can then build on in future. That's what I'd regard as a good outcome.
Right, Sir Vince Cable, thanks very much indeed for speaking. Labour campaign for local elections in England as Shadow Community Secretary. He's well known for a spectacular bust-up with Boris Johnson, but he was also at Mr Corbyn's side during this week's meeting with Jewish leaders, and he joins me now. Why did that meeting go so badly?
Well, I'm not sure it did go badly, Andrew. I think it was the start of a dialogue with the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council. They put forward in a frank and fair way to the Labour Party their views and what they would like to see. And Jeremy Corbyn listened and took on board a number of those issues, and assurances were given that by the time we next meet, because this is the start of the dialogue, sufficient progress will be made on a number of those issues.
Okay, well, the Board of Deputies and Jewish Leadership Council said our meeting with Jeremy Corbyn was a disappointing, missed opportunity. He failed to agree any of the concrete actions we raised. And Gillian Merron, Chief Executive of the Board of Deputies, said the meeting did not go as well as hoped. The leaders' team delivered a lot of warm words, but little in the way of actions. Can we go through some of the things that they wanted out of this meeting?
Absolutely.
So, for instance, would you personally share a platform with somebody who had been expelled from the Labour Party for anti-Semitism?
No, and it's been made very clear by Jeremy Corbyn that nobody should be sharing a platform with anybody who has been found guilty of anti-Semitism. That is absolutely clear. Anybody who is expelled from the Labour Party, we should not be sharing platforms with these people.
So why
very
did you not write it? I mean, they wanted you to write this into your rule book. Why did you not do that?
Well, of course, it's very clear already. You should not as a Labour Party member, share a platform with anybody who has been expelled from the Labour Party.
The second thing that they asked for is that you should adopt the internationally agreed definition of anti-Semitism. Now, you've adopted the headline agreement, but not lots of the examples that were given after that headline. And again, why not?
Well, one of the action points that was agreed was that we want to go further. We've written into the rules the international definition, but in terms of examples, we don't actually think that those examples go far enough. So, for example, in the Chakrabarti report, she highlights the use of the term Zio, and that isn't something that, for example, is included in the examples. We want to work with the Board of Deputies.
So you want to go further, you're saying?
We absolutely do. We want to work with the Board of Deputies and with the Jewish Leadership Council to write into Labour Party rules a much broader definition of anti-Semitism that goes beyond that, including terms like Zio, which quite frankly are abhorrent and insulting.
That's really interesting. Can I ask you about some of the examples that they give that they wanted you to include and they say you haven't? Holding Jews collectively responsible for the actions of the State of Israel. You're Jewish, you're responsible for what's going on in Palestine, that kind of thing.
Well, let me make it absolutely clear, Andrew. I spoke in the anti-Semitism debate in the House of Commons. I opened for the Labour Party front bench. I made it absolutely clear that in a democracy it is right to criticise any government of any nation, just as we would criticise the British government and the actions of the British government. It is right, where appropriate, to be able to criticise the actions of the Israeli government. Criticising the Israeli government is acceptable in a democracy. Criticising the people of Israel or Jewish people across the world is not. That is the fine line, and it is absolutely clear, that fine line between democracy and anti-Semitism.
It's just, I mean, it's slightly odd because you're sounding very firm on all these issues and very clear. But the Board of Deputies got the impression in this meeting that you weren't going to accept these internationally agreed examples, and they've been agreed by about 130 British councils, by the Scottish Parliament, the Welsh Assembly, the CPS, the police, and yet not by the Labour Party.
Well, by the time of the next meeting, we're meeting again in July after the National Executive Committee meeting in July. I hope that we will be able to meet again, go through the progress that has been made, because many of the asks that were put forward, it was agreed to take away, for example, to expedite some of the historic cases, particularly the high-profile cases, and hopefully by July we will be able to show the Board of Deputies and the Jewish Leadership Council that real progress has been made, because, let's be clear, we have to make progress on this. We've not done nearly enough quickly enough, and that is recognised across the Labour Party. It's recognised by our new General Secretary, Jenny Formby. We are determined not just to call out anti-Semitism, but to root out anti-Semitism. It has no place in the Labour Party.
So in that case, why did you not accept the need for an independent ombudsman, as you were asked?
Well, this gets a little bit tricky, because you will know that there are changes to data protection rules that are affecting all organisations, and that does mean that we aren't able to. Well, we aren't able to share with third parties details of our party members, but we are employing a general counsel to be able to expedite these cases, to offer the transparency that's needed. And I hope that by the time we next meet, we will have made sufficient progress in making sure that anti-Semitism, those complaints of anti-Semitism, aren't just called out, they're rooted out of our party.
Do you think that the issue of anti-Semitism is being used by Labour MPs to attack Jeremy Corbyn?
No, and Jeremy's made that very clear, that the notion that these are smears against the Labour Party, he does not accept that. It is perfectly valid for...
To be clear, you think Len McCluskey is wrong about that?
Well, Jeremy Corbyn has said that he doesn't agree with Len McCluskey on this. It is perfectly acceptable for Labour MPs to call out anti-Semitism in our party and in our movement, and it is incumbent on our party and our movement to then act and root it out.
MPs such as Chris Leslie, Neil Coyle, John Woodcock, Wes Streeting, Ian Austin and others have become a dismal chorus whose every dirge makes winning a Labour government more difficult, says Len McCluskey. Is what he says more damaging to the Labour Party, or the dismal chorus? Which is it?
It's neither. I think what we've got to do, we've got to acknowledge that there is an issue of anti-Semitism on the left of British politics. It's not just something that affects the right of British politics.